Troubleshooting tone issues is a large part of my job, especially when I go to visit my feeder middle schools. I feel like I'm a professional bow hold assister or something to that effect. Especially with the younger students and the lower ensembles, I just go around fixing bow hold after bow hold after bow hold, and fix bowing motion, fix this and that. And so just over the course of several years of doing this, I've kind of developed an instinct and an intuition for who's not holding their bow right, so I can just go right to that student and kind of help the students that need the most help first, sort of like orchestra triage, and fix those problems and then kind of work my way out from there. So if you have someone who can come and help you every day and can come help fix bow holds and help, show students how to bow correctly and all that stuff, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. And one of the methods that I'm going to discuss is something called programmed learning. Programmed learning gives students verbal cues so that you can quickly tell them what they're doing wrong and they should know how to fix it. So we see this a lot in sports. And in sports, they're very effective at efficient communication and efficient coaching through programmed learning. You might see this in track, where a track coach says, dig, 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 and the athlete knows exactly what that means and how to correct their stride. You might see this in soccer. The coach might just yell out, bend your knees. Or maybe in baseball, keep your eye on the ball. These are just short, quick things that change the mechanics and fundamentals of an athlete. I think we should use the same things in our orchestra classroom and develop verbal cues for our students so that we can quickly fix them. So with programmed learning, we have 3 different processes that we're trying to solve. We have internal cues, external cues, and normal cues. Internal cues address a student's body motion. It's something that they physically must do differently. An external cue is something that relates to the student's instrument and how they can physically manipulate that instrument, or how they are orienting themselves to that instrument. And a normal cue in an orchestra classroom is how it relates to the music. So most of the internal cues that I use relate to bow motion. So one of the verbal cues that I like to use when it comes to bow motion are mountains and valleys. If I say mountains and valleys, what that translates to the students are move your wrist, okay? Mountain, okay, so the wrist makes a mountain. Valley, wrist makes a valley. So we'll go over this and I'll explain, okay, mountains and valleys, everybody make a mountain, everybody make a valley, and then they'll understand what I'm talking about. And then in the middle of rehearsal, I can just say mountains and valleys, and everybody says, oh yes, yeah, and they start moving their wrist more. Okay. Another one that I might say is open and close. If a student is kind of bowing like this and they're not a bass player, okay, they can open the elbow and close the elbow. Open the elbow and close the elbow. So it's just a quick way to get them start moving right. So the external cues that I use have a relation to the instrument. So if I say grip the string, well, that's something they have to do with the bow to their string. So if I say grip the string, students know what I mean and they will apply more grip to that string. Or if maybe some of my internal cues aren't helping to solve the problem, maybe I'll change it to an external cue, like straight bow. And then the student will look and say, oh wow, my bow's not straight. And then they'll start paying more attention to the internal cues on how to fix that straight bow. So normal cues would be how it relates to the music. Like you might say louder or softer, or sometimes I'll just say tone if I don't feel like they're making good enough tone. And however I need the sound to change, we can come up with normal cues for that. I'm sure we've all experienced anecdotes of like the talkative conductor, where we've just been sitting in a rehearsal and the conductor is just going on and on and on about, how they want this phrased or how they want this to be or something like that. And I remember a time where, this conductor was talking about, I want fire to be coming out of this volcano and I want, all this stuff, to be going on. And somebody from the trumpet section said, so you just want us to play louder? So oftentimes when we're using coaching cues through program learning, we can summarize those, paragraphs of how we want the music to be played into single words and achieve the same effect. So I wouldn't say there's never a time for metaphor and all this kind of stuff in rehearsal, but you have to use it very sporadically and you have to use it very carefully. If you're doing it all the time, you're going to be accomplishing very little in the classroom. We also have to understand that when we're troubleshooting in the classroom, all of these techniques are going to vary by instrument. Like when the shoulder activates, for instance, that's going to happen all the time in your bass section. It's going to happen a lot more in your cello section. In violas, it's going to happen a little bit more. In violins, your shoulder's going to activate at the frog and at the tip. So we kind of have to create a mass pedagogy way of being able to communicate to the students and really say the same thing so that we don't always have to break it down section by section, particularly at the more intermediate and advanced levels. So when I'm going out and I'm judging competitions or evaluations or festivals or anything like that, I can almost tell immediately how an ensemble's tone is going to sound based on the way they're holding their instruments. If a student's setup is out of whack, it's going to change a lot of their typical motion. You know, the typical motion that we use, if it's at a different angle, you know, this way, or however we line up with the instrument, it's going to create a lot of problems, and it's going to be almost impossible to solve those problems without fixing the setup first. So with cello and bass, how long is the end pin supposed to be? You know, we have these, as teachers, we try to save time by having these guidelines and saying, you know, with bass, you know, the index finger should be even with the eye, and, you know, with the cello, the C peg should be, you know, behind the left ear, you know, and so we try to, you know, create these reference points, but it's not always the same because some students have longer arms and shorter arms and all this kind of stuff. So we have to be able to get them to where they're able to reach comfortably. So how do we know that their setup's out of position without having them check and move around? Well, you can get a good idea by where their bowing lane is. If they're naturally falling well above the fingerboard every time they bow on the instrument, perhaps their end pin's out too far. You know, perhaps, you know, they have to drop the shoulder a little bit more. Maybe that'll help. But, you know, also, you know, you can adjust the instrument. You don't always have to adjust the player. And this also might differ by certain setup styles. For instance, you know, some cellists tend to play more vertically, and over time it's kind of gone back to more of a horizontal cello position, and that's going to also adjust your end pin length too, because if you go from a horizontal position to a more vertical one, you're going to have to increase your end pin length. You know, otherwise your cello is going to be out of position. You know, with bass players, are we sitting or standing? And if we're standing, what is our relation to the instrument? And if we're on a stool, you know, with the 1 foot up, 1 foot down thing, what is the student's relation to the instrument? You know, if the student is leaning the bass, you know, against their abdomen, and, you know, it's causing the neck to tilt this way, how are they supposed to keep a straight bow when they draw the bow if, you know, unless they adjust the arm to do this type of thing, you know, or this type of thing, depending on which direction the bass is leaning. So sometimes we have to orient the student based on their playing position, maybe get them around the bass a little bit more so that they can lean the bass into them without changing their bowing path. You know, ultimately there's a lot of different ways to play these instruments, but when you're in the classroom, you have to be able to get them to do certain things. And if they can't do it using that technique, they might have to adjust the technique. Not to say that the technique that they're using couldn't work for somebody, but you know, sometimes you just can't figure out all of that stuff on the fly, and you need to have straight bows. You know, you need to have some fundamentals in place, and to have that occur, you might have to reorient the student or reorient the instrument just to get them to play with a good sound. So the common problems that we see with violinists and violists with their setup problems is due to their beginning year, where they're all sitting in a block and they're all facing front, and they're, you know, and that's great because their teacher can walk up and down the rows, and that's how most beginning teachers teach. But they're sort of square to the stand and square to the instrument, and so the instrument's out here, hopefully, you know, and then, but the music's over here and the teacher's over here, and so what tends to happen is that we tend to drop the instrument down here so that we can look at the fingers and see what's going on here, and then that, of course, is going to change the bow path this way. And so we're not going to really be able to play with good sound that way either. So when a student graduates from an intermediate orchestra into an advanced orchestra, they're going to sit the way they should stand. You know, their left foot should be pointed at the music stand, and the right foot should be at a 45-degree angle, and their body should be aligned with the right foot, and their head and nose should turn to be aligned with the left foot. Other technical problems that we see with setup are caused by students sitting too much and having their muscles tighten. So if you can get them to stand up in class and play, especially during their beginning years, that's probably the move so that they can develop more flexibility. And again, we have what I call cell phone posture, which is the rounding of the shoulders and, where everything's kind of down here because we're playing on the cell phone. Well, what's happening is that it's tightening up the scapula and the rhomboids over a period of time because the shoulders are always forward. But we can't really play our instruments with our shoulders forward right here. So we have to work on how to stand up and roll your shoulders into position. Not shoulders back, but just shoulders in a neutral position is hard for some students. And they might feel strain on their muscles from doing that. So, you have to kind of work out their muscles so that they can have good body position. And the same thing's true with the erector spine. When they're standing. I have students that stand up and they start complaining like, oh, this hurts. It hurts to stand up, really? Yeah, so you start looking at them from a profile perspective, and what's happening is that their hip flexors have gotten so tight from sitting so long that they have a really high degree of anterior pelvic tilt. I'm talking like 15 degrees or more. And so what happens is because their pelvis is tilted that way, the erector spine is now, shaped like the bottom of a question mark. It's not that they have scoliosis or anything like that. It's just they have really bad posture from sitting all day long. And so get your students to stand up, get good posture, and then when they sit back down, they should use the same posture as when they're standing up. Another thing that's the same from standing to sitting is that we need to have our shoulders over the hips, okay? That's a verbal cue that I can use from time to time. Shoulders over hips, and that keeps them from slouching over this way or going over this way. Not to say that we never can do that when we play, but that should not be our default position. We also have to sit and stand in a way that we have comfortable balance, because sometimes when we play, we shift our weight. In fact, we're shifting our weight constantly when we play if you want to have a good sound. And if you want more information on motion and balance, check out Season 1, Episode 8, where I go into more detail on this. Another great way to troubleshoot an orchestra is just watch their bows. If their bows are sliding, it probably means that they're not getting good grip. If you see bows that are bowing in an arc instead of a straight line, it's probably because they have a bad bow hold. So when you're watching an orchestra, watch their bows and see what their bows are doing, and you know exactly which students that you need to help fix. The other thing that we need to do is make the students aware of their bowing lane. Are they aware of what the bow is doing, or are they only focused on the left hand? If they know where the bow is in relation to the bridge and the fingerboard, then you can help fix a lot of problems. And again, that goes down to isolation. So a lot of times you just want to have them freeze, observe, and then fix. I want to talk a little bit about rosin, and rosin can be a two-edged sword because we need rosin to make a good sound, and I've come across students that hadn't rosined their bow since the day they got it. Well, it still works. Okay, great. Rosin's going to dry out and it's going to turn to dust, and it's going to fly off. So you need to apply rosin every day to your bow. Then the downside of rosin is then it can get on your strings and it can get on the body of the instrument. And if you've got strings that are caked in rosin, that can really hurt your tone too. So one time I went on a clinic with a mentor of mine, Dr. Marvin Rabin, and Dr. Marvin Rabin takes a couple things to every clinic he ever does. He takes his own percussion mallets, and he takes these alcohol swabs that he buys from a pharmacy for like $1. You can get like 100 for $1. And you open them up and there's an alcohol swab inside. And I don't take the mallets with me everywhere I go because I don't own any, but I did steal that second trick from him with the alcohol swabs. And so what he does is, you get to this point in the rehearsal where, you're like an hour out or a couple hours out from the concert, and everybody's gotten changed and everybody's gotten back, and, you're about to tune up again. And that's when you pass out those square alcohol swabs out to all the string players, and you have them clean the rosin off of their strings. And that's going to really transform their sound and create a lot more resonance and just make them feel good about what they're doing. So a couple things about that, just to be careful. Don't get the alcohol on the bow hair. Don't get it on the body of the instrument, only the strings. So if you get it on the bow hair, you're going to have like slick spots in your bow, and that's not going to be good, especially not, discovering this for the first time, like right in the middle of a performance. That's going to be pretty bad. So, just make sure they understand this. And the second thing is it's going to have kind of a psychological benefit to it, I think. It's kind of like, the magic feather with Dumbo, that where he gains the confidence to fly. It's like, ooh, we're doing something special. And then that kind of leads into a special performance too, I think. So I definitely steal that trick from Dr. Rabin. You can steal it from him too. I think it works pretty good. But yeah, if we don't have enough rosin on the string, how are we going to be able to grip the string effectively? How are we going to be able to get that resistance? And how are we going to be able to learn proper bow motion?